My name is Jeffrey, and together with my group members, Nancy Rodriguez, Madeline Souza, and Eduardo Pantoja, will present language learning and bilingual education. So first, we'd like to present you with a brief definition of what bilingual education is. So bilingual education is the teaching of academic content in two languages that usually involves a student's or a person's native language that we will refer to as L1, and a second language or a target language that we will refer to as L2. So with this type of model or this type of bilingual program, there will be varying amounts of each language will be used depending on the outcome goal of the model. So for instance, if we have a dual language immersion program, two languages will be used equally or to somewhat equally. Whereas if we have a transitional bilingual program, one language will be used more than the other. To continue, we have the book presenting us with many different bilingual education programs that exist today in the United States, and some of them are structured immersion, also known as submersion, sheltered English, transitional bilingual education immersion, heritage language, mainstream bilingual, and dual language. All of these will be discussed in more details later in the presentation. Now we would like to present you with a brief history of bilingual education in the United States. So bilingualism and multilingualism, they both have had a long history in the United States. We would like to start with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that legislated that all citizens were to receive equal treatment in regards to government-funded services, including education. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, is very important because it served as the base for all language programs in the United States, especially for immigrants who were here to receive an education and who were here to hope to receive the resources and help to help them become good or to reach good level of English proficiency. Next, we have English only legislation. So maybe some of you might have heard or be familiar with English only movements back in the 60s. And this is very important because English only signified that you were considered a good American. And these movements also had created a lot of controversy because they were targeting the non-English speaker community. So, and also to add to that, basically English only meant one language, one nation, which in this case, or in the case of the United States, it's not necessarily true because the United States doesn't have an official language. But people think that English is the official language of the United States. Next, there's a central question that we'll like you guys to think about while going through our presentation, and is, if the students do not speak English, are they receiving an equal education if they are in classrooms in which content is only taught in English? Again, we would like you guys to think about this question while you're going through the presentation. Next, we would like to present you with the Law versus Nichols case of 1974. This case is very important for bilingual education history because 1,800 Chinese American students who were not English proficient speakers, they sued the San Francisco School District for not receiving equal access to resources to help them become or reach a good level of English proficiency.
Lau versus Nichols case of 1974 is a case that made it to the Supreme Court in which some 1,800 Chinese American students sued for not having equal access to education. Since all education was in English, Chinese-speaking students were effectively erased in the eyes of San Francisco School District. The lawsuit made it to the Supreme Court dock, filed because the school district was violating the 1964 Civil Rights Act, denying the students equal access to education. This case made it to the Supreme Court due to the Bilingual Education Act of 1964 did not specify which type of approach should be implemented neither, which means teachers, schools, and school districts were able to decide what implementations and define what the Bilingual Education Act of 1964 would actually be within their schools and within their classrooms.
We would like to present weak bilingual programs, and I use the term weak because these were programs in 1974 that were not meant to raise a bilingual population. We're all members of a society with proficient in two languages. So the target or like the goal of these bilingual programs in 1974 were to keep students monolingual or to help them transition from speaking their native languages to only speaking the target language. So in this type of bilingual program, the students' primary language was used to transition into English proficiency, like as I mentioned previously, as well as to study content matter like mathematics and science in their first language. Now, we have the second language acquisition approach. So this approach states that language is naturally acquired and not learned. So this made me think about the readings for last week, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. But also, if you have time, you can also make comparisons between what I have for this slide for this type of approach and compare it to the readings for last week, especially the first reading. So to continue, this approach stated that the best way to acquire a second language is not by analyzing language into discrete parts. By discrete parts, we mean breaking it down into like grammar rules and conjugation forms and things like that, or things of that nature. However, it was rather to engage the language naturally, holistically, and using it for communicative purposes. And this approach proved to be inadequate for language development. So basically, this approach wasn't successful for English learners or emerging bilinguals because they continue to show signs of an improvement and they continue to lag behind their Anglo-speaking counterparts.
Social cultural theory, also known as SCT, provides an alternative perspective to the role of language in human development. In SCT, language is never the target of learning. It's actually used as a mediation tool in which learning unfolds. SCT assumes that learning is fundamentally varied, and learning is defined by variation.
Being a bilingual person and having grown up in a Hispanic household in the United States, I can say that there is a great difference between the Latino and American cultures. Soy la hija de una mamá argentina y un papá chileno. I am the daughter of an Argentine mom and a Chilean dad, yet I have lived all my life here in the United States. As I was growing up, I was taught and purely spoken to in Spanish. However, when I began preschool, everyone spoke English. I can still vividly remember my teachers and peers speaking to me in English while I sat there awkwardly and in silence because I didn't understand what they were saying, nor did I know how to tell them that I didn't speak English. As time went on, I eventually caught on to the English language and am now fluent in both, and it has not been until recently that I have begun to notice the differences between the two cultures other than language. One of the more obvious differences is the difference between social approaches. With Hispanics, they greet each other con un beso y un abrazo, with a hug and a friendly kiss on the cheek. Over the years, I've noticed that Hispanics speak at a very fast pace, and their voices are filled with a lot of emotion. On the other hand, when I walk in the household of an American family, I find that many like to greet each other with a handshake and maybe a hug if they know each other well enough. Conversations with Americans tend to be in a more quiet, monotone voice and move at a slower pace and are shorter in general. Después de 15 años de mi vida, yo puedo ver cómo la cultura hispana y americana me ha afectado en cada día de mi vida. After 15 years of my life, I can most definitely see how both the Hispanic and American cultures have influenced me in every day of my life. In a way, it's kind of like having your own personal on and off switch in your brain. When I'm with Hispanics, the switch flips one way, and I immediately change my actions and how I greet people to be my more loud Latina self. Yet, when I'm with other Americans, the switch flips the other way, and my actions on how I greet and address people change almost completely. But I wish there was some sort of intermediate as opposed to just one way or another. Many consider the United States a melting pot due to its fusion and widespread amount of cultures. The thing is, no one melts. Las culturas diferentes están todas aquí, pero al mismo tiempo están muy separadas. The different cultures are all here, but at the same time, they remain so separate. I think that we can all benefit from learning and applying the affectionate personalities of Latinos and the ambition of Americans into our everyday lives. This way, many can feel more comfortable when around others that belong to a different ethnicity. All in all, throughout my life, I've created a habit of altering the way that I greet and address people based on their cultures, and I hope that we can all find a way to melt within our country, because this mix of cultures is so amazing and has influenced me in many more ways. Porque los dos son increíblemente maravillosos y me han hecho la persona que soy hoy en día, because both are incredibly wonderful and have made me the person that I am today. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking about the types of bilingual education programs and the implications for classroom pedagogy, meaning the reason and purpose behind these different teaching practices. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called structured immersion, and this is a technique used to rapidly teach English to ELLs. This type of education is taught only in the dominant language in society, so it would be English for here in the United States. An example of this would be English Immersion School, where there is no use of L1, so that the student can hopefully start using more vocabulary from L2. And this is a very, not a very good type of environment, because a lot of people tend to sink or swim in this type of environment, meaning like they either do really good or they end up failing out of it. And it's a very subtractive type of language learning because it pretty much wipes out all of your previous original language. And most people in this immersion program are language minority students. And many English learners can tend to struggle in this type of immersion because there isn't any use of L1 in this type of teaching, so it can be very hard to learn from. So the second type of teaching that we're going to be talking about is sheltered English submersion. And this is an approach to teaching English learners which integrates language and content instruction. And it's taught mostly in the society's dominant language, which here in the US, for example, that would be English. And this is the type of immersion where kids would be pulled out individually. And the negative part about this is that they're missing valuable class time to the classes that they actually need, such as science, math, and social studies, stuff like that. So it can be a very subtractive type of learning.
So pretty much in this video, it's just an example of the use of two different languages, Spanish and English.
Today we are going to talk about making food choices for a healthy lifestyle. This poster shows a picture of a plate. My plate, mi plato. It's a guide that shows people how to eat in a healthy way. Mi plato shows that healthy foods are categorized into 5 different groups. 5 different groups. Each food group is represented by a different color. We have the grains group, which is the orange group. Grains, granos. Grains, granos. Next, we have the green group, which is the vegetable group. Vegetables, vegetales. Vegetables, vegetales. The vegetable group. Next, we have the fruit group, which is represented in red. Fruit, fruta. Fruit, fruta. The blue group is the dairy group, Productos Lácteos, the dairy group. And finally, we have the protein group, which is represented in purple, protein, proteina, protein, proteina. We should eat foods from all of the 5 food groups every day. The sections of the plate are different sizes. The bigger the section, the more food from that section we should eat each day. For example, the green group, the vegetable group, is bigger than the protein group, the purple group. So that means we should eat more vegetables in a day than protein. It's important to vary your vegetables. You can eat them raw or cooked, canned, or frozen. So who in here had vegetables with their dinner last night?
So the next type of teaching style we're going to be talking about is transitional bilingual education. And this type of education program is a teaching model with 2 main focuses. First, it's to ensure the students master educational content in their primary language. Then they help to assist in becoming fluent in the second language. And this type of education starts with L1 and it moves to society's dominant language. And then this is more of a transitional approach, but its main focus is for students to become proficient in L2. And I guess the good thing about this is that they incorporate more of L1. So still mastering content in L1 if needed, but sadly sometimes this can be like a negative approach because L1 can still be lost in the process. There's always that if or maybe factor that L1 can be lost. So this is more of a gradual transition as to the other teaching styles, whereas the other approaches are very abrupt, and this is more of a gradual transition from L1 to L2 while still keeping the first original language. So the next type of bilingual education we're going to be talking about is immersion, and this is bilingual with emphasis on L2, and this can be taught with 2 languages, where 2 languages are used for instruction on a variety of different topics, such as like vocab and different things, and it's made for people who speak society's dominant language, and it's usually for students who are trying to learn a second language. And these immersion programs are an additive of bilingual education. They're created for students who speak the society's dominant language when trying to focus on learning a second language. And this would be thought of more as an elective, like for high school or for college, or more for enrichment, kind of like a more for fun. It's not needed to pass school, but it's more of to strengthen your own knowledge on different languages.
Transitional bilingualism is the shift from being bilingual, knowing 2 different languages, to only speaking one leading language. This usually happens over a period of time and can be seen within a few generations. There are families with immigrant grandparents who speak primarily their native language and some of the new country's language. Their children then speak both languages, but the grandchildren only speak the dominant or preferred language of the new location. The United States provides many examples of this phenomenon. For example, a woman born and raised in Mexico moved to the United States and learned a bit of English and spoke a great deal of Spanish as well. Her daughter, born and reared in the U.S., was equally fluent in both Spanish and English, bilingual. The grandchild of the Mexican immigrant, who was born and has been reared in the U.S., speaks only English. This process is due to the pressure that is put on the individuals by the society of the new environment. They cannot survive well without the primary language spoken in their new home, and eventually, since fewer and fewer people speak the old native language, it is not used as often, as it is not a necessity, and is lost.
the main focus on this program is focusing on students who used to speak the language of their parents, but as they grew older, they lost that language on the way. And a lot of cases, this happens a lot actually. This happens for reasons that when you start school, you start by speaking your own language, right? Correct? You start by speaking your parents' language. And once you start school, you start learning a new language. And in this case, it's English. And because of that, a lot of schools don't focus on two languages, but mainly one language, being English. And as you're learning English, you're losing your first language, being Spanish. And what they're trying to do in this program is they're trying to teach students their old language that they learned before, their first ever language. That's the main focus for this program, is to teach them their old language. And this happens a lot actually. From personal experience, I have friends who used to speak Spanish when they were really tiny, when they were young, and now that they're older, they don't know how to speak it at all. They can understand it, but they can't speak it. And this is actually not that rare because this happens a lot to a lot of people. This happens to a lot of people. And this is something that I feel like it should change, especially for schools, because I believe schools should focus on two languages, not just one. Because during the process of just learning English, the other language is being lost. And if you look at your right, the first button on the left side, it says language I learned as a baby that I can't speak anymore. This is something that a lot of people go through because it's actually true. And on the right side, it says language I learned in kindergarten that I speak fluently. Again, this is something that is very true because, like I said before, whoever learned to speak their first language that they learned to speak, they can't speak that language anymore, but they speak fluently their second language that they learned. The main focus of mainstream bilingual is that in this program, what they're trying to do is they're trying to teach students two dominant languages. And in this case, the two dominant languages are English and Spanish. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to focus on having a bilingual society. They want to do this for the reason that they believe that this is very beneficial. They believe that by learning two languages, it can benefit a lot. It can benefit in the ways that this will be good for when you're looking for jobs, let's say. A lot of jobs, they prefer someone who knows a second language. So if you have in your resume that you know another language, that you're dominant as well on that language, it will the chances of you getting hired are highly more up there instead of someone who doesn't know a second language. And in this case, they're trying to do that so that you can use both languages in your daily lives.
Well, I'm at the International School, and just like the name says, kids here are receiving an international immersion education, totally immersed in Chinese, Japanese, or Spanish. So will this be a good fit for your child? Let's find out.
When I heard about the school, I realized this is the best time to learn Spanish, and what a great gift to give my kids. There's a warmth in Mexican culture, there's a warmth in Puerto Rican culture that I think is really special. I'm drawn to that. And I love that my kids are immersed in that kind of culture. I did have that feeling driving away, like, did I tell them about that part, about that it's all going to be in Spanish and that they won't understand probably most of it the first day? Like, did I fill them in on that part of the school?
When they come to be with us, they're being part of different cultures. So they get immersed not just in the language, but in the culture that each teacher represents. You don't just teach the language, you teach them your culture.
And that's what I think is so wonderful about this kind of education, is you're learning language in the normal context of your everyday life. But that optimal window for learning language is age 3 to 11. And so that's the gift that I'm trying to give my kids by sending them here, is to take advantage of that window of time.
Yeah. Have they surpassed you in their Spanish ability?
Of course they have. It was a little humbling the first time my 4-year-old corrected my Spanish. He said, no, it's siete. I said, yes, siete. No. And I could just see his little, like, you've almost got it, but not quite, Mom. There's a subtle difference between learning about other cultures so that you can appreciate diversity and learning in a culturally diverse environment. You have to be prepared to be very involved. So every family commits 25 hours of volunteer effort here a year, and most families surpass that 3- and 4-fold. The intangible benefit that is so hard to articulate. Every parent wants their child to be prepared for school and for work and to be a citizen, to be out there in the world. Rather than just surviving in that world, I think they're going to thrive in that world.
Well, what an exciting place to learn. And, I have a 6- and 8-year-old, and having seen all this, it makes me think that I perhaps should have given more thought to the option of immersion education a little earlier. Hopefully for you, it's not too late. I'm Tony Martinez. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Better.tv. Always on with home, family, life. Email us at ideas@better.
Dual language immersion. So just like mainstream bilingual, the main focus for this program is focusing on 2 dominant languages, Spanish and English. And in this program actually goes more by detail, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to make schools go half and half, meaning they want to teach Spanish and they want to teach English. Half being Spanish, half being English. Half the day being Spanish, half the day being English. That's what I'm trying to say. And from personal experience, I was lucky enough, the school that I went to growing up, they actually did this. We will have, in the morning, we will have English, and then in the afternoon, it will be all Spanish. And I feel like this is very beneficial because like that, you get to learn both languages. And I think this is a really good idea that all schools should actually do. I also believe this is a very effective way to learn, and I feel like this can be really beneficial for everyone in the long run.
So DLI, dual language immersion, basically our students are learning Spanish and English at the same time. They start in kindergarten with 90-10 model.
90% of their day is actually in Spanish, and only 10% is in English. All of our students, whether they're English speakers or Spanish speakers, learn to read in Spanish.
Yo empecé hablando español en la escuela primaria, in kindergarten.
This is a good school because you get to speak English and Spanish and learn new stuff.
Really focusing on developing both languages and to become proficient in both.
In a specific DLI classroom, we have half of our students who are English dominant and half of our students who are Spanish dominant, and so together they're actually helping each other learn that second language.
But they use visuals, they use sentence structures and songs, they use music, they use opportunities to link language to concrete objects to help them build those foundational language skills.
For example, the student in kinder who walks in and only knows Spanish, that 10% of English and the fact that they're learning everything in Spanish, all those academic terminologies, once they hit English maybe like in 6th grade, it should transfer.
Cuando tiene más tiempo, es como muy fácil aprender el lenguaje.
But research shows that if you build that first language and make it very strong, if you become a strong reader in your first language, then those skills will transfer when you move into English.
In 3rd grade, then we begin to teach writing in English, writing and reading in English formally to students.
And they are completely fluent by the time they reach 6th grade.
So now they're in 8th grade, and so they do 50-50. Last year got history in Spanish, and this year they're doing science in Spanish. So it switches like that. They get both vocabularies.
It challenges you a lot. It gives you that mentality to practice and work hard to switch so quickly and easily.
It's incredible because they automatically do it. Once they walk into my classroom, they know that this is a Spanish classroom now, and they flip the switch.
There's a benefit that happens in our brain. You know, those bilingual and trilingual brains are working differently than a monolingual brain.
And also your academics, you just get challenged constantly to switch languages all the time.
Our English learners are actually more successful in our program, spending more time in Spanish than their peers in non-DLI classrooms.
So they're smart cookies, they're really smart students.
Pues yo pienso que les va a ayudar bastante porque como hay muchas personas ya que en un trabajo ocupan saber 2 idiomas para poder atender las gentes.
I believe it's just an advantage and it's such a blessing to know both languages because I can communicate with my family members here and in Mexico.
Me gusta porque puedo hablar con más personas como en el mundo porque hay muchas personas como en California que hablan solo español.
We've really been pleased. They've blossomed with it, they've matured with it. It's just become customary to have 2 languages, and we've really been impressed with how they've grown with these 2 languages.
To close the presentation, we want to ask you guys some questions. And feel free to think about it. And the questions are, which bilingual program suits you better and why? Or should all students be bilingual? What do you guys think?